It is the 4th of July. Election day is finally here.
Yay!
And the UK is heading to the polls. By the early hours of tomorrow morning, a new government should be announced. And if you haven't done so already, please do exercise your democratic right to vote. Millions around the world don't have it. And don't forget to take your ID with you. I'm joined in the studio today by the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor, Rachel Cunliffe.
Hello.
And down the line from Chester by Senior Data Journalist Ben Walker. So before we turn to what we can expect this evening as the night unravels, let's just take you through how things stood, or at least were predicted to be, before the polls opened this morning. Now, for legal reasons, we're not allowed to talk about anything to do with people actually voting today. So these are what was being predicted as of last night. Ben, please take me through Britain predicts its final forecast.
Britain predicts forecasts Labour to receive in excess of 400 seats in the House of Commons, 418 parliamentarians, compared to 114 for the Conservatives. The Conservatives are on course to lose more than 270 seats. That would represent the worst defeat for the Conservative Party, apparently the most successful political party in the Western world. That would be their worst defeat ever. Lib Dems look set to have one of the best nights, I think, in post-war history for them. They won't get many votes, but they will get many seats because of that Conservative free fall in support. Currently, they're forecast to come away with 60 seats. Apparently, Lib Dems regularly tell me this is far too much. We're not going to get that. But then again, they were also telling me they weren't going to win the litany of by-elections they went on to win. So, not sure what to believe there. Reform are on course to score something short of a bit of a political shock, I have to say. They're on course to take 16% of the vote. It could vary between 14 and 16, but they're looking to poll much better than what UKIP got in 2015. In the space of a few short weeks, this public limited company is on course to do a hell of a lot better and come away with 6 MPs in the House of Commons. Nigel Farage looks set to cleanly, safely enter the House of Commons via his Clacton constituency. Scottish Nationalists look set to lose more than half their seats, and Plaid Cymru are in the running to take an extra one and are neck and neck with Labour in Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey. So, yes, and let's not forget the Greens who have been working on a number of seats for quite a while. It's nip and tuck as to whether they take Bristol Central. It's more likely than not that they've held off the Labour challenge in Brighton Pavilion. But what's the most interesting fights, I think, is what they're going to be doing in these 2 target seats of theirs, Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire. The numbers suggest they might just cleave them off the Conservatives. But really 4 seats forecast for the Greens right now, but all, by the slimmest of margins. I wouldn't bet any money on that. To be honest with you, I wouldn't bet on money on much of this forecast indeed. There's around about 50 to 60 seats in which the forecast majority is going to be smaller than 300 votes. All right. And then you've got around about 180 seats, about close to a third of the parliamentary total, with the forecast majority, smaller than 2,000 votes. So despite the Labour landslide despite the overwhelming lead for Labour in the opinion polls, there are a hell of a lot of seats coming down to the wire right now, which will put us between, a defeat for the Tories on the scale of 1997 or a defeat for them on the scale of total annihilation, falling down to as little as 20 seats. That's how close things are.
I think that's really interesting. And one of the things that I've been sort of surprised by of this campaign, talking to Ben and also to other pollsters, because other polls are available. Britain Predicts is obviously the gold standard, but there have been a lot of polls in this election, and the huge range of predictions, everyone predicting a Labour landslide, but a difference for the Conservatives of 100 seats. And every pollster that I have spoken to has talked about the uncertainty, how many seats where the margins are going to be really tight, and where they say, like, look, this is the model, but they're very open about how much they don't know. And actually, even though I do feel somewhat overwhelmed by polls and data over the last 6 weeks, it has been quite exhausting. I think the polling industry as a whole has done a really good job over this campaign of explaining where their figures come from and where there is doubt. So they're explaining why there is such a large range. And I'm sure that next week there's going to be some soul searching, who was right, who was wrong, what led to that big range in predictions. But I have found it fascinating how these models work and where that variation comes from. And I also just think it's really good to have people who know about this stuff acknowledging how much they don't know.
It's always a strength to acknowledge uncertainty. I mean, if we take the 6 final predictions that have come out in the last, sort of last night and the night before with Survation that went first, that includes Britain Predicts, there is a bit of variation, but they all have huge majorities for Labour. So every single one predicts in excess of 400 seats. Now, let's remind listeners and viewers that 418 1997 was their best ever, and they got 202 5 years ago. So this turning round the party by Keir Starmer in 5 years, doubling the number of seats, is actually really extraordinary achievement. So the predictions range between 430 and 484. That was the Survation one that we talked about on yesterday's podcast.
So actually all of them are higher than 1987 for Labour.
If we look at the Conservatives, again, you're kind of in the middle with your prediction, Ben, for Britain Predicts, but the lowest we have is 64, the highest 126. So whichever way we cut this, according to all the main polls at the moment predicting, obviously before people went to vote, but it's going to be the worst ever result for the Conservative Party. And I guess that difference between 64 and 126, the difference between humiliation and not quite annihilation, but close to.
Well, it's huge. And there are a whole load of questions that sort of start to become relevant when you go under 100 MPs about how do you form an effective opposition? Do you have enough people to fill all the shadow roles and all the committee chair roles? And actually, Freddie Hayward wrote a piece this week on could the Lib Dems be the second biggest party, or could the Lib Dems and others work to sort of form a coalition opposition, and how would that even work? It's very much uncharted territory.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about it yesterday as well, and George saying that they're going to have to borrow quite heavily from the Lords. Just before we move on to tonight, it's really fascinating looking at the vote share versus number of seats, though, Ben, because you've got the Lib Dems, if we just go with Britain Predicts, between 11 and 12% getting 63 MPs. Reform on nearly 16% getting 6. Green on 6% getting 4. I mean, it really does hammer home the first past the post system, doesn't it?
First past the post rewards people who have local strength, concentrations of strength. If you're so thinly spread out, if you're getting, 20% in the villages and 20% in the towns and 20% in the cities, oh yeah, well, you represent 1 in 5 of the voting electorate, but yeah, you don't have any strength to beat the other parties. It is first past the post. It's a horse race, okay? And look, in the case of Reform, they are the masters of their own demise here. They're going to come away with 5 million votes, give or take. They're absolutely adamant. All Reform insiders say they're going to top the UKIP share in 2015. But if you don't have local council strength, if you don't have local government representation, you're not really going to get anywhere. And this is why when we were talking about the prospects of Rishi Sunak losing his Richmond seat, because, in high-profile contests, some attitudes do change. If he was going to lose it to Labour, well, Labour have had literally zero elected representation in the Richmondshire area this century, okay? They've had absolutely nothing. So if you don't have that, you have nothing. And so what's happening for the Reform share is they're likely to, with the exceptions of places like Clacton, Boston, maybe the South Essex estuary, they are going to come away with, again, a vote share in the mid-teens, maybe early high 20s, and that'll be it. And I'll be honest, though, I think this first-past-the-post discrepancy might not last forever. Between the Lib Dems and Reform, because look, the defeat for the Conservatives is going to be psychologically traumatizing to people on the right, and I don't know what that means for where Reform is, what they will do, who they will organise, what kind of members they will get. Do we expect Reform to fold in with the Tories after this? I don't know. If they don't, you should expect Reform to organise in Labour-heavy areas, winning council seats, becoming the opposition, becoming the main choice of opposition for voters living in the area. Places like Rotherham and, Hayward and Middleton back from the old UKIP days. If you don't have local election strength, you're not gonna succeed under first past the post. You need to concentrate the voters. It's so key.
I think there's a really interesting question about how do protest parties or new parties build support, and I think we've seen two very different models for doing that are going to be really interesting in this election. One is the Greens that have done over the past couple of decades, really, particularly the past 14 years, exactly what Ben has been talking about. Strong local presence, going for councillors, winning councils, London Assembly, and then focusing their energies in a small number of seats that they think they can win and are quite likely to do well in. That takes time. That takes years. That takes efforts in local elections and really just, hammering home, going at it, building credibility. The other thing that we've seen is the Reform, sort of very new party, no councillors, no up until the local elections, no building of support. What they've got is one really, really high profile, charismatic figure who has effectively won a national campaign, which will be enough for him to get his seat, but means that they will struggle elsewhere. One of them took the shortcut. One of them did the hard work of building that support. I would say that if you want to progress on those gains, you get more MPs, the long, hard route is more likely to take you there because it's not based around one person. But I was talking to Paul Goodman. My interview with him is up on polling day today. He is a Conservative peer and he ran the Conservative Home website for a decade. Before that, he was a Tory MP. And I said to him, where's the Tory fight back going to come from? And I was sort of expecting him to say, we need to figure out the Farage reform problem. And he said, no, you've got to look to the local associations. You've got to look to councils. You've got to kind of do the really hard grassroots work of building up from the bottom. Look at people like Ben Houchen, will be the most senior Conservative politician in a way because he's the most high-profile Conservative who's actually in power after this election. It's got to start on a local level, local councils, rather than thinking you can take some kind of shortcut and get to the top that way.
The polls close this evening at 10 o'clock and almost immediately afterwards we'll get the exit poll. Ben, can you explain to us, firstly, how accurate these are and secondly, how they do them?
Oh, how they do them. Well, to be honest with you, it's a simple process of just standing outside the polling station and going, hello, excuse me, do you mind just telling me how you voted, how you're doing and all that kind of stuff. And it's just taking all that. An army of volunteers do that.
I believe they do 144 constituencies and they get you to basically repeat your, go and do a fake ballot paper again, don't they?
Yes, a fake ballot paper, 144 constituencies times... Oh, yes, they're probably getting close to maybe 100,000 people there. So, yeah, that's going to be quite a thing. And it's just that. It's just asking people who've actually voted. Now, they obviously, that's not exactly a representative sample because some people vote at certain parts of the day. This assumption that people who, working age people doing the 9 to 5, vote after 5 or they vote first thing in the morning. Yes, that still stands the test of time. Does it change the overall forecast? Well, it used to. Very much so. Now, as we've become a bit more, we're not that class-based society in electoral terms as we used to be. I don't think it necessarily matters. John Kirst has said he's able to, probably by about 2 p.m. today, he is able to get a decent impression as to how this country's voting. It's the same thing that we do with our models. You have a model, you have assumptions, you have counterweights to counterbalance potential overrepresentations. And yes, so the exit poll is just like any other model, but with a massive sample size and shock and horror. What gives it the advantage is it's taken on the day of the poll. Historically, yeah, they do quite well. They can be a few dozen seats out, a dozen seats at most out. The last one in 2019, understated Labour by about 10 or so seats. So really, when you look at the exit poll, when that exit poll drops at 10 p.m., you can be relatively confident. I say relatively because it has had its issues. You can be relatively confident that you're going to be looking at the actual result, give or take a dozen or so seats.
And when can we expect, Rachel, to see some proper results, some actual results?
The record is Sunderland, which managed to get their result in 2001 by 10:43.
Yeah.
So 43 minutes to count and declare.
Well, I was in Sunderland at the count in 2010.
Go on, what was it like?
Well, it's manic.
Was
It's
it
hilarious.
frenetic?
Oh, it's brilliant. They've got loads of volunteers from the local colleges, and they run. They run. The votes arrive from around the constituency at a leisure centre. It happened to be that year. Was there with the BBC with the legendary Kate Adie, and these vans arrive in the car park, and they go and get these boxes of votes, and they run. It's incredible, and it was definitely pre-11 o'clock. They were looking to beat it that year, but they didn't, obviously.
So this year, we're not actually expecting any before 11:30, 11:45. Halton and Sunderland South is gearing up for it. Newcastle was the winner in the last election, but we've had some boundary changes and we're not sure. I've been told to also look out for Blythe and Ashington, which is trying to get their result in 15 minutes before Sunderland South. So it really is about racing, essentially, like your place in the history books, who declared first. But then
it's a big lull.
They start trickling in. You don't really start to get what I would say real results until 1, the bulk really start coming around 3, all the seats that Ben and Finn have done this really helpful guide of sort of which seats to watch, the Prime Minister's seat, Liz Truss's seat, some of the seats that will be bellwethers for trends like Labour and the Red Wall, the Greens, Reform, all of that. You're really looking
between 3 and 5, isn't it?
Yeah. So there isn't really a good time to have a nap. I think the good time to have a nap was probably before listening to this podcast.
I'm going to give James Gallagher a shout at the BBC. There's a fantastic article about how, if you want to pull an all-nighter on election night, how you get through it, and then obviously work into Friday as well, presuming people are at work today. So this is your 4-nap guide to staying up. This is from sleep medicine consultant at the Royal Brompton, so we presume Dr. Ali Hare knows better than us. So they say 4 naps. You have a preemptive before it starts, so I guess that's 9 o'clock-ish.
Yeah.
You have another one in the middle of the night, and according to that, so your good time is probably midnight-ish. It's going to be quiet. You have nap 3 on Friday morning before going to work or pre-school run.
That's not going to happen.
That's a tricky one. That's probably
tricky one,
6?
Yeah.
Bit tricky, because that's exciting around that time as well. And then you have a 4th after lunch on Friday, because that's when we generally feel a bit sleepy.
But that's when we're podcasting.
Well, we won't be able to.
we won't be.
We will just be, adrenalised.
Do you want to know what I'm doing? I'm going to be this is too edgy, because like the end of the work day before the exit poll, it all kind of gets a bit like there's nothing to do, but it's a lot of frenetic energy. I'm doing a Pilates class.
Oh, lucky you.
Because I feel like that will get my mind in the right kind of state for staying up all night.
Ben, what are we hearing about postal votes? There was a story around yesterday that focused actually on Kemi Badenoch, but generally speaking, that there's been reports that postal votes haven't been received and that there's problems with Royal Mail. Now, if contests are close, are you hearing much about that? Is it a problem?
Postal vote delays, I think, are par for the course. I think they happen every election. I think, seeing it as a general election, we're only now just talking about them again. I know of a council by-election in the Northwest a few years ago, and it was in the middle of a sorting office strike. And a number of postal votes just weren't taken to the counting area on time. And I believe it's fair to say the result was very, very close. And I have to wonder out loud, whether if all postal ballots got delivered on time, had the sorting office not been on strike, maybe the result would have been different. I don't think we talk about that enough, because I don't think Royal Mail goes on strike during a general election campaign. Something to bear in mind, about Sunderland. About more than half of the votes cast in Sunderland are postal vote ballots. You know that? Right, around about a fifth of all the electors in this country are postal voters.
Yeah.
In Sunderland, it's like 50-something percent.
It's extraordinary.
And a place like Runcorn, near me in Cheshire, it's like 10%. Okay,
Yeah.
So if you want to wonder why sometimes votes get counted quicker, perhaps in Sunderland, I think the fact that postal votes might have something to do with it, because they do early sampling, they do early verification.
Are you saying they cheat, Ben? They
They just have favourable. They have favourable circumstances.
Unfair advantage. I was reading that in Kemi Badenoch's seat, she's worried about postal voting, the number of people who haven't received them on time, and the delays there. If that seat were to be close, then that could have an impact on the Tory leadership contest that we're all expecting. That said, the Kemi-Badenoch seat is one of the few that is not expected to be that close.
Yeah.
But it does have, serious ramifications. And if this trend of more people voting by post continues, because it didn't used to be this number, if this continues, then we're probably going to have a think about timings and Royal Mail and contingency plans and the rest of it. This is actually the first general election I have ever voted in at an actual polling station. I always got a postal vote before. It was just habit. My first election was at university, so I needed to get a postal vote. And then I just kept doing it. And it does feel more democratic. I know it's not.
What, going to a polling station?
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I do a postal vote because I generally haven't been. I've been working on general elections, but I do miss the.
But the cross in the box and the.
But it's interesting. What I would give one tip throughout the evening, when people are watching at home or listening, you've got your pick of the broadcasters. Generally speaking, when they cross to a constituency, and there's someone there from that organisation live, and they're telling you what they're hearing, it's pretty accurate. It's really fascinating being at a count. You've got all the election agents on the floor, and then you've got the journalists and reporters, scattered around trying to fight for who can be the closest. And you keep going up, and you're allowed on the floor, actually, and you say, oh, how's it looking? And, you can see people's faces, but you can see the piles of votes. So that's sort of one tip. What are your standout memories of elections past?
2019 was a weird one for me. I actually wasn't working. I was at a party, and it went on until 6 a.m. It wasn't a political party. It was just some friends, but we had the coverage on all night, and I remember really loud music and then suddenly turning it down round about 3:30 because Jo Swinson had lost her seat. This was the election in which the Liberal Democrats kind of ran this weird presidential campaign, and Jo Swinson literally said, I would like to be Prime Minister, and then she lost her seat and she was sort of in tears, and it was just a quite stark reminder of how quickly, that's it. She's lost her seat. She's not relevant anymore. People haven't talked about Jo Swinson for 4.5 years. It was a sort of reminder of how quickly something can go from, you're saying you're in the running to be Prime Minister. Obviously she wasn't, to, that's it. So that stuck with me. Does this bring you to your favourite bit of polling that we've had?
Yeah. So we will leave you with this, people. If you're having an election party tonight, the timings aren't the only things to consider. More in common, this is spotted by producer Catherine.
This is the best thing ever.
Absolutely top journalism here. So they've looked at UK voting intention by alcoholic drink preference. Now, we can't go through them all, but perhaps not surprisingly, if sherry is your tipple of choice, amongst sherry drinkers, there is a 28-point lead for the Conservative Party. That is the only alcoholic beverage listed here where
the Conservatives have a lead.
Conservatives win. Now, this one surprises me given how many champagne socialists there are, but apparently sparkling wine or Prosecco, only a 4-point lead for Labour. Where would you fit in, Rachel, here? Your tipple of choice would be?
Mine is a gin and tonic.
Okay, so that's
a 12-point Labour lead. Although tonight it's going to be coffee, which isn't on the list.
VK, is that a disgusting alco pop?
It is. We've got some in the fridge for after this podcast, Hannah.
I think I'll pass. 40-point Labour lead. This must be the youth vote.
Bailey's isn't on there, which just surprises me.
It's not an election night.
Every drink is an election night drink.
Well, wherever you watch election night, wherever you listen to it, drink sensibly. And we will be back with you tomorrow, bringing you the results of this wonderful democratic country that we live in, with presumably a Labour government.